Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for being with us. As many of you know, today is President's Day. President's Day originally began in the 1880s as a celebration of George Washington's birthday, which was on February 22nd. Then in 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act into law, making Monday as the day for most federal holidays and shifted Washington's birthday to include Lincoln's on the same day. And so President's Day was born in 1968. Prior to that, Lincoln's birthday, which was actually February 12th, was celebrated in only a handful of states, but it was certainly not a federal holiday. George Washington not only played an indispensable role towards our victory in the War for Independence, but was elected as our very first president serving 2 terms. He is known as the father of our country, and the republic he helped create was clearly a voluntary union of sovereign states that delegated limited powers to a federal government. Ironically, on President's Day, we are also forced to remember the birthday of Lincoln, who is often celebrated for saving the Union and is consistently listed by historians as one of our greatest presidents. But is that really true? How accurate is it? How does the Union saved by Lincoln compare to the one that Washington believed in and helped create? Was Lincoln really a great president that deserves our admiration? And what did he really save? Our guest today is Walter D. Kennedy, Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans and co-author of The South Was Right and numerous other books about the war between the states. He'll be joining us in just a few minutes today to help dispel the many myths of Lincoln with some cold, hard facts that you will not be taught by our politically correct education system or the many biased historians that push the stinking Lincoln martyred hero mythology. But first, a word from our sponsor, LifeWave, a unique product that uses light reflection to activate the body's own natural energy, supporting healing, improving performance, and combating aging without drugs or stimulants. Check it out, and we'll be right back with our guest, Walter Kennedy.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back. And now let's welcome to the program Walter D. Kennedy. Walter, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I am doing great for an old boy from Louisiana. And please call me Donnie. I'm Walter D. Donnie Kennedy, and all my friends call me Donnie. So please feel free to call me Donnie.
Donnie it is. Well, before we get started, I just want to say that I realize some watching might say, well, it's obvious that Mr. Kennedy is biased on this issue and that anything you say is suspect. But I know that you can back up whatever you say with historical proof that they can look up for themselves. The lies we have been told in this country didn't start in the 1960s, and I'm honored to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Lon. I appreciate it. And that is why Ron and I, in every book we write, we have more footnotes. And I want to just explain to folks, footnotes does not prove what I'm saying is correct. It's proven that what I am saying, you can go look at it and see, did he quote or cite that individual correctly? So footnotes gives you the background to go back and check me out. And I have challenged people from the beginning, check me out. If I'm wrong, let me know. I'll be glad to change my opinion if you can show me I'm wrong. But so far, after writing probably close to 200,000 copies of books, I have not had anybody. I think two times I had some mistakes on some battles that I misquoted when they were fought or something of that nature. But that is it. And when it comes to Lincoln, hey, I've got it well documented on what that man did to America.
Great. Well, hey, let's get started. And once again, thank you for being here. So we've got some questions, and
Yes, sir.
I've added a couple too, and they're no brainers really. But anyway, most people view Lincoln as America's most important president. Yet you and the SCV, that's the Sons of Confederate Veterans, often refer to Lincoln as a tyrant. Why is that?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Lincoln is probably the most important president post Appomattox. He is the one that destroyed the original Union as created and given to us by our founding fathers. You hit the nail square on the head with your opening comments talking about the Union prior to Lincoln, the Union that George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, our founding fathers gave us was a union of free people in sovereign states. These states created the federal government to be our agent, to do for us things that we have granted to them the authority to do. We did not create a lord and master to ride over us. Today, real states' rights are gone. What we have today, post Appomattox, thank you, Mr. Lincoln, the Radical Republican Party, this is the ones that created this. What we have today is state privileges. The states have the privilege to doing whatever the federal government allows them. So therefore, we have a different government post Appomattox, post Abraham Lincoln, post the Republican Party. They're the ones that destroyed the original Union. Now, as far as a tyrant, yes, you could go back and look at the things that Abraham Lincoln did, and they were tyrannical. Everything from shutting down newspapers that he did not agree with, opening people's mails regardless, imprisoning his political opponents, people that were speaking out against him, throw them into prison, imprisoning also the legislators of Maryland he was afraid that they were going to secede from the Union. So what did he do? He sent troops in there, and he absolutely, through the military police, jailed them. He jailed the grandson of Francis Scott Key, the man who wrote the Star Spangled Banner, because this gentleman was from Maryland. He was an editor of a newspaper, and he was editorializing not in favor of secession, but against using troops to force sovereign states, people in the sovereign states, to be in a union that they did not want to be a part of. Because, just like he said, if you believe the Declaration of Independence, the only legitimate government that exists here in these United States is the one based on consent. Bloody bayonets are not the instruments of consent. So today we live in a government, a federal government, that is pinned together at the point of bloody bayonets. If you read the Declaration of Independence, you'll notice that that type of government is called a tyrannical government. So therefore, we consider Abraham Lincoln America's greatest tyrant.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't know what he did in Maryland. And in fact, he sent troops early on into Kentucky because he was afraid they would secede as well.
In Missouri.
Yeah. So he was proactive on preventing the legislators from making a decision one way or the other in those states.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really not accurate. I guess you can say he technically saved the Union, but he saved a completely different Union, right?
So look, he did not save the Union, he destroyed the Union. Let's think of it like this. My wife and I are in a marital union. Now that union is permanent as long as those vows that we have made to each other are maintained. But if those are broken, then guess what? The union no longer exists. If she decides to leave me because I'm an abusive husband and I grab her by the hair of the head and drag her back in the house and beat her up and lock her up and tell her she can't leave the house anymore, have I saved the marital union? Of course not. I have created a tyrannical situation because a marital union exists because of mutual respect and love. That's what this union was held together. And I know that because I can go to Chancellor James Kent from New York in his study of the U.S. Constitution and international law. He plainly stated that the Union was held together by the mutual benefit and goodwill of the parts. Mutual benefit and goodwill, not bloody bayonets, is what holds the Union, original Union, together. That is not what held the Union together post-Lincoln, post-radical republicanism.
You know, a lot of people give President Buchanan a lot of flack. They make it sound like, well, he sat around and did nothing for 4 months. Well, there was a reason he did nothing. Even though he didn't agree with secession, he also realized he did not have any authority in the Constitution to force those states back into the Union.
Absolutely. He was probably a great president, probably one of the last great presidents we had in that era. And as you said, he was opposed to secession. So was Robert E. Lee. So was Jefferson Davis. People don't realize Jefferson Davis fought against the concept of secession until when? Until Lincoln was elected and you had a minority party that was going to misuse and treat the South as really enslaved property of the North. And then they had to leave. When did Arkansas, Virginia, North Carolina, and the other border states, when did they secede? They seceded when Lincoln called troops to invade sovereign states to force them back into the Union. And they said, no, you can't do this. Arkansas was one of the strongest pro-Union southern states at the time until Lincoln said, okay, Arkansas, we need you to give us X number of troops to invade your brothers and sisters in the southern states who have seceded. And Arkansas said, no way. Rather than to send troops, we will join the Confederacy because we do not want to live in a tyrannical nation where the central government can invade the peoples of a sovereign state and force them to act against their will. Remember, the uniqueness of these United States is that we live in a government where we tell the government what to do. The government doesn't tell us what to do. And that's what made these United States of America such a unique system of government. Read the Declaration of Independence. It clearly states that a free people have an unalienable right to alter or abolish any government that does not fit their needs and to establish a new government more to their liking. That's exactly what our colonial fathers did in 1776. That's what our Confederate forefathers did in 1861.
Yeah, and a lot of them were either the sons of or certainly the grandsons of the founders.
Right.
Another thing, okay, so the 75,000 troops, that was after Fort Sumter, but, you know, a lot of people don't know, nobody was killed at Fort Sumter except for, I think, 2 people, and not to downplay it, but 2 people during the surrender ceremony.
I thought it was 1 person. It may have been 2, but I thought it was 1.
You're probably right. I'm going to defer to you. I think there's probably 1 killed and 1 wounded, something like that.
Yeah. Yes. Right. And I have so many people doing interviews. They say, "Well, it's your Southerners' fault because you fired the first shot, and you fired the first shot. You caused the war." Well, I quickly remind them who fired the first shot in World War II in Pearl Harbor. It was the United States of America. The USS Ward sunk a Japanese sub and killed those people before any aggressive action was taken against the United States. So in theory, the United States is at fault for starting World War II if you say the South is at fault for starting the war by firing on Fort Sumter. So That's something that a lot of people will try to pull on you, but it's absolutely incorrect. According to international law, it is not the one who fires the first shot that causes a war to be fought. It is the one who makes the firing of that first shot necessary.
Right.
And that's the case of the USS Ward at Pearl Harbor, and that's the case of the Confederate States of America in Charleston Harbor.
Yeah. And I think Lincoln was so determined to have this war, and there's a lot of evidence of that. We can talk about that some, that if it hadn't been at Sumter, it would have been somewhere else. Sumter was probably the most convenient one, but it would have been somewhere else.
Absolutely. He needed to galvanize public opinion. What most people don't realize is that Lincoln was elected with only 39% of the popular vote. Now, just think about that. If the past president had been elected with only 39% of the popular vote, and he started doing some things that people didn't like, what chance would he have to stay in office? So what Lincoln needed more than anything else was something to galvanize Northern public opinion against the Confederacy. And so what he did was go ahead and take Fort Sumter and try to reinforce it, because he knew if you try to reinforce it, and he sent troops, he sent naval vessels and troops to retake Fort Sumter, and he knew the Confederacy would have to fire on those ships and troops, or else they would lose that fort. And they couldn't lose that fort. It was in the center of Charleston Harbor, about the second most important city at that time of the Confederacy, New Orleans being number one.
And I think most people on his staff, except maybe one or two, urged him not to do this. Do not try to resupply. If you do that, you're going to have a war. And,
exactly.
And he ignored it. Matter of fact, Winfield Scott, if I'm not mistaken, said, don't do this.
Yes, correct. And as a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, I believe it was Major Anderson that was the federal officer in charge of Fort Sumter. Lincoln told Anderson that he did his duty, and the results was exactly what they expected and what they needed. So Lincoln more or less admitted that. So, but a lot of people don't like to hear that.
Yeah. And just a reminder to some people out there, it wasn't originally Fort Sumter. They were originally, was it Moultrie? And Anderson snuck in the dead of the night. He snuck into Sumter because Sumter was still being, they were not rebuilding, they were still constructing it. They had civilian contractors there on the ground working on it when he snuck over there.
Yes, there was a negotiated agreement between South Carolina and the federal troops that the South Carolina militia and troops would not attack Fort Moultrie, would not impede, or it would not prevent the fort from being supplied, Fort Moultrie. But the Union decided, federal said that they would not move from their position. So they broke that agreement in the middle of the night and escaped and spiked the guns at Fort Moultrie, and then moved into Fort Sumter, which was, as far as militarily, it's a lot smarter move because it's an easier fort to defend. But nevertheless, you have broken your agreement. Because the South could have overrun Fort Moultrie and taken Anderson and that whole crew very easily, but they did not, because they thought they were dealing with gentlemen. And that's one of the problems we had during the war. So many of our leaders still thought we were dealing with gentlemen, and we were not. Ask Mr. Sherman about that.
Now, Lincoln said that the states were never sovereign. Was he wrong, and why is state sovereignty so important?
Okay, first of all, I'm going to answer your last question first, because a lot of people don't understand. A sovereign state is just like an independent nation. These colonies, when they first threw off the British control, they became sovereign states. Throughout the history, from the beginning of the first Continental Congress all the way through the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, right on through the founding and the adoption of the Constitution, the states were always treated as sovereign states. Now, you can go to the Treaty of Paris. This is the treaty that the United States that Great Britain signed with the United States, and Great Britain did not give independence to the United States as an entity in and of itself. It was a plural entity. It was these United States, and they named specifically 13 former colonies as state, and they said they were free, independent, and sovereign states. His Majesty, the King of Great Britain, recognized that the states were sovereign. Back up to October 1776. This is 3 months after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The officer corps of the United States Army had to take an oath of office. And in that oath of office, they recognized these United States, and then they named 13 individual states, starting with, I think it was New Hampshire and going all the way down to Georgia, naming each one of them to be, now listen, to be free, independent, and sovereign states. Now, Mr. Lincoln didn't think they were free and independent sovereign states. The King of England recognized it. The Colonial Officer Corps recognized it. And every other entity, even in the first government of these United States, the articles under the Articles of Confederation, I think it is Article number 2, states that each state of this confederation to be free, independent, and sovereign. Now, isn't that interesting? Let's go to the Constitution. When the Constitution is ratified, how is it ratified? Is it some plebiscite by all the people of America? No. Look at Article 7 of the Constitution, and it clearly states that this Constitution will come into effect when 7 states in their state conventions ratify this document, and the ratification is effected only in those states so ratified.
Seven or nine. You're talking about the Constitution?
The Constitution. I thought it was 7. It may have been 9.
Yeah, okay, 9. But the thing is, those 9 did that. There were two states that didn't join right away.
Well, there's more than that, because at first it was just the 9, and then you got up to, I believe, 11, because Rhode Island and North Carolina did not ratify it for a year and a year and a half after, and they were treated as sovereign states. But that points to the fact that who is ratifying this Constitution? It is the people of sovereign states. So we go from the Continental Congress, the Officer Corps, the King of England, and then we go on to the Constitution, and we see that all these people recognize the states as sovereign, yet that Ichabod, Abraham Lincoln, claimed that no state was ever sovereign, that it was the Union that created the states, and it was the Union that provided the independence for the state. That is a total myth. But there is one individual in history that agrees with Lincoln that the states were never sovereign, and that is Adolf Hitler. In Mein Kampf, he virtually quotes Abraham Lincoln when he talks about the sovereignty of the states in the United States. I mean, it's a virtual, when I first read that, it just blew my mind. Here, Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler in perfect agreement that the states were never sovereign and that the Union created the states. Malarkey. So that's all I can say on air.
But that's part of the lie that he told.
Yes.
Because now you have the created entity with limited delegated powers acting like it's its responsibility to keep all of the states in line. No, you can't leave now. This monster you created is going to keep you from leaving now.
Exactly. And that is what is so interesting, because to do so, you're negating every word of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, go back and read the Declaration of Independence, folks. The only legitimate government is that government based on the consent of the governed, that we, the people, have the right to alter or abolish the government if we don't like it. If we have the right, the unalienable right, and they state that it is unalienable, the right to form a new government more to our liking. What this is telling the world is that here in America, we, the people, rule the government. The government does not rule us. Very interesting, but so many of our politicians do not understand that. They look at it as if government is God. As a matter of fact, there was one senator, I wished I could remember his name. It was one senator recently, I think some northern senator, stated that that the idea that God created our rights instead of government was ridiculous, and only radical rightists would believe such a thing. Well, guess what? In the Declaration of Independence, it clearly tells us that our rights do not originate from government. It originates from God. It's a divine instrument given to us as humanity. So it's really sad, the state of education of even our political leadership, totally ignorant. Either they're totally ignorant or they're willfully ignoring the truth in order to pursue an objective, and that objective is ultimate tyranny over all Americans, not just Southerners, but all Americans.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that was Tim Kaine, but it could have been any of them. I mean, they're all pretty worthless. If the South had won the war, the United States would not be one nation, indivisible. Did not Lincoln save our one nation, indivisible?
Well, no, Lincoln created our one nation, indivisible, and that is one of the things that we try to point out quite often. That term, one nation, indivisible, does not appear in any of the founding documents. Read all the founding fathers, their letters, their journals, and everything. Excuse me, I forgot to turn this thing off. There, I'm sorry.
No problem.
I thought I had it off, but I didn't. Lincoln was the one that introduced that concept, but he didn't introduce that term. If you'll go back and look through all of our documents, all the founding fathers' writings and such, you will not find that term anywhere. You'll only find it about 30 to 35 years after the war, when a radical socialist, a defrocked Baptist minister, he was so pitiful that even the American Baptist, he wasn't even a Southern Baptist, the American Baptist decided they'd have to defrock him. He didn't believe in the divinity of Christ. He didn't believe in the Bible, but he did believe in socialism. He and his cousin were radical socialists, and he was the one that introduced that term that we now hear so often said in the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I'm going to really shock you here. I started doing some research on that term, one nation, indivisible. Where did it come from? It didn't come from any of the founding fathers. It didn't even come from Abraham Lincoln. He didn't say those exact words. At least I've never found it, and I've done a lot of research on Mr. Lincoln. But where it did come from, in 1845, the Communist Party in the Federal Republic of Germany, they was trying to promote communism in the Federal Republic. And there was a Federal Republic of Germany at that time. So they write to, guess who? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and say, what do you recommend that we do to promote communism in the Federal Republic of Germany? Marx and Engels sent them back a list of 17 points that they needed to follow to promote communism in the Federal Republic of Germany. The very first, listen to me, the very first recommendation was to convert the Federal Republic of Germany into, quote, one nation, indivisible, end quote.
Wow.
Now think about that.
Yeah. And Bellamy was that guy's name. I can't remember his first name. And
Francis
Bellamy. And I know we grew up doing the pledge, and we say one nation, indivisible, but it would be hard for people to get it around their head, grasp it that was actually started by a socialist. And now I did not know the one nation, indivisible came from Marx, but
I didn't either until I found it, and it was an eye-opener. It's almost as eye-opening as reading through Mein Kampf to find out what Hitler thought about Lincoln and the quote Civil War, because he used the pattern that Lincoln laid down in destroying the Federal Republic and making it one nation, indivisible, one Reich, indivisible. And so the pattern is very, very similar, and it was worth me reading through Mein Kampf just to find that. And I tell you, reading through Mein Kampf is like reading through, I don't know, it's Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto. All of that stuff, I read all of it, and it's difficult reading.
Yeah, well, they definitely don't have much in common with our founders, that's for sure.
Man, or you and me either.
Yeah. Did Lincoln free the slaves? Because he's called the Great Emancipator, so he's got to be the guy that freed the slaves, right?
Correct. And the world is flat, and the moon's made out of blue cheese. Yeah, so yeah, if you believe one, you ought to believe the other. No, Lincoln did not free the slaves. As a matter of fact, Lincoln received a lot of criticism from the European governments as well as some of the members of his own cabinet because they said where he could have freed the slaves, he did not. Where he could not touch the slaves, he claimed that he freed them. That document, the Emancipation Proclamation, was a document that was written in desperation by Lincoln. He was trying to put a wedge between the European powers and the Confederate States of America, make it look as if maybe if they supported the Confederacy, they'd be supporting slavery because the Europeans were basically anti-slavery. But guess what? So were most Southerners at that time. So but anyway, that's one thing he was trying. And the second thing that he was really hoping for, and the North pushed for quite often, was trying to instigate a servile insurrection in the South. They wanted those slaves to rise up and attack the folks at home, much like the slaves had done in the Haitian Rebellion. And if that had happened, most of your Confederate soldiers would have to leave to go back home to protect their wives. Because remember, it was nothing but women, old men, and children left in the South. But the slaves did not rise up. Now, I'm going to make a statement here that some people could have trouble understanding, but the slaves did not rise up because, number one, the South was their home. They were not African Americans. They were Americans of the South with African lineage, just like I'm a Scottish lineage Southern American, but I'm not a Scotchman. And these blacks, these slaves, although they did not like slavery, they did not hate their white neighbors and white friends. And if you don't believe me, go back and read the slave narratives that the federal government did itself, and you'll see so many times they were asked, well, why didn't you just leave, or why didn't you rise up? And they said, we couldn't do that. We just soon as attack our own people, then attack our white friends and our white neighbors. The slaves did not like slavery, but they did not hate their white neighbors and friends. And one of the main reasons, they were Christians. They were some of the best Christian people in the South at that time. Thou shalt not kill meant something to them. So no, they didn't rise up. And if they had, the Confederacy would have been doomed within 6 weeks.
Absolutely. And like you said, they tried to instigate that, but they weren't successful. And I think that says a lot. I mean, you have to. It has to be for the reason you said, because there just was not enough people back there to have kept them in line if that was their goal. Also, the contact, and granted this happened more as the war went on, their contact with the Union Army wasn't really a good experience either, now was it?
Not at all, not at all. And that was one of the things I think in the South was right. I have a story, tell the story of some New England Yankees. And one of the two things that the New England Yankees hated, they hated Irish and they hated blacks. And the further south they went, guess what? They ran into more Irish and they ran into more blacks. And so they really, really despised the black people and ridiculed them. And they used the N word back well before anybody else was using it. So no, they did not like them. As a matter of fact, the northern states, many of the northern states passed laws to prevent free people of color from moving into their states. Give you a quick note on that. There were more free people of color in the South in 1860 than they were in the North. Now, how did these free people of color get here? It was because Southerners were very busy at manumitting slaves. Manumitting is meaning that when you have a slave property, you number one, you educate him, you provide him with a way to earn a living, a profession, a home, and then you free him. You give him his freedom papers. That's how Southerners freed their slaves at their own personal expense. A classic example that a lot of people don't know about is Nathan Bedford Forrest. General Forrest freed, I believe, 30 to 32 of his own slaves before the war. They were with him, armed and mounted as soldiers in his his cavalry during the war. And he even said they were some of the best soldiers he had. He told them, if the South wins this war, you're going to be free anyway. Slavery is not going to go beyond this war.
Right.
We lose the war, you're going to be free too. So he said, you can be free. You can do one of two things. You can go home or you can stay with the army, whatever you want to do. I think out of the 34 that was with him, only 2 left, and they went back home, one in Mississippi and one in Tennessee. The rest stayed with him all through the war and became some of the best soldiers. And at many of the old Confederate veterans reunion that was had during the last, really up until about 1930s, there were black Confederate veterans there. And that's, you go to the what they call it, the Grand Army of the Republic.
Right.
They very, very, very seldom was there a black person there. But when you go to the reunions of the old Confederacy and the Confederate veterans, there was always black troops, black veterans, and they were honored members. My great grandfather was a Confederate soldier from Copiah County, Mississippi, and one of the men that entered the Confederate service was a black man there, and he went to all the old Confederate reunions more than my great grandfather ever did. So they were honored members. There was a lot of black Confederate soldiers and really the Confederate military was the most integrated and diverse military on earth at that time. But to hear the liberal woke people talk, we were just a bunch of white supremacists running around trying to lynch people that we didn't like.
Yeah, and I've seen videos on YouTube and other of historical like the Sons of Confederate Veterans meetings from the 20s and 30s.
Yes.
And you'll see the black soldiers there. You'll see them with the whites. And I mean, it's obvious. It was not just a few here and there. There were quite a few. And you can read some of the papers from the time, and you will read that about not just during the reunions, but during the war, Union reports that the blacks there, they weren't just digging holes and being body servants. They were fighting.
There was a story told, and I've got the record on this. It was a black soldier from Mississippi that was captured at Gettysburg by the Yankees, and the Yankees was trying to get him to turn coat and to become a Yankee soldier. And they said, "Well, we're your friends up here," and he looked at him and said, "I would rather stay friends with the people I know than pretended friends that I don't know." And he managed to escape, and he got back to Mississippi. So he was happy.
So let's talk a little more about the Great Emancipator. What was Lincoln's view of African Americans?
Well, if you read his, let's see, that was September 18th, 1858, during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, he profusely proclaimed himself as a white supremacist. I mean, it's without a doubt. And he denied that he ever was in favor of making jurors or voters or any sense of equality between the black and white races. That he said he felt like the white race was superior, and he would work to keep it in that situation. He would ridicule anybody who believed in racial equality. So again, Lincoln and the North itself. Now, let's be honest. We have to look historically in the 19th century. That's the 1800s. I would say 90%, if not 90%, of all Americans held that view. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
We have grown beyond that now. So I'm not going to be grossly critical of Mr. Lincoln for holding a view that was very common.
North, south, east, west.
Absolutely. But I am going to be critical of those who claim that he was a humanitarian and believed in civil liberties and believed in equality, unlike the, quote, South, when the South was the one that provided more rights and more homes and more jobs for blacks, free blacks in the North. So there's more to the story than what we've been told. Lincoln's home state of Illinois in I believe it was 1862 or 1863, passed constitutional amendments that, number one, prohibited blacks from coming into Illinois. That's the land of Lincoln. It also prevented them from testifying against whites in court. They could not be voters. They could not attend schools with white children. Don't tell me that the North was a land of equality and brotherhood and love for the black man, and Lincoln led the way. Malarkey. There's a different story there. The truth will really, really shake you up when you start looking at that.
Yeah, they were freedom and equality for the blacks, but only in the South. They didn't want them up there.
Absolutely.
Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, other states, either, like you say, kept them out altogether, or in some cases they would require a bond that was more than most white people could have afforded at that time. And step out of line one time and you're gone. So
absolutely. And that was one of the main reasons, and people don't realize this, is one of the main reasons that the Republicans and Northerners fought to keep the, quote, territories free from slavery. It wasn't necessarily the slavery that they disliked, it was the slave that they disliked. They did not want the black man in the white territory. Right. Lincoln emphatically stated that he was for preserving that territory for free white labor. So, and most politicians up north agreed with Lincoln on that. That's why they were so adamant. One of the reasons they were so adamant against the South taking their slaves into the territory. Not only would it provide for maybe growing more Southern influence in Congress, but the worst part was that you were bringing black people into a lily white society, and they was having enough trouble getting rid of the Indians, so they didn't want the red man, they didn't want the brown man, they didn't want the black man, they just wanted good old-fashioned pale Yankees.
Now, Sherman and Grant, they were not, they were pretty much the same mindset, if not worse than Lincoln. And in fact, the Emancipation Proclamation caused some trouble within the military. I mean, they were like, hey, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to keep the Union together. I didn't sign up to free the slave.
Absolutely, and that almost cost Lincoln the election in '64 because that one issue. It was not a popular issue at all. The number of recruits went down radically once that Emancipation Proclamation was first announced. And that's when they started having draft riots. Remember the terrible draft riots they had? Matter of fact, right after the Battle of Gettysburg, but several battalions or regiments of Gettysburg troops had to be marched to New York to put down the race riots because the people in New York was just incensed that they were going to have to go to war now and fight to, quote, free black people. And like you said, that's not why they signed up to begin with. The whole idea Lincoln used was we will preserve the Union. Of course, the very act of preserving destroys. I'm often reminded of a child that'll hold a butterfly in their hand and they want to hold on to it so tight they squeeze it to death. Yeah. That's what Lincoln did to the Union. Wanting to hold on to it so much, he squeezed the life out of it. And what he gave us is what we have now, federal tyranny. Why do we have such trouble with deep state politicians? Yep. You can thank Mr. Lincoln and the Republican Party.
Well, and now both parties, because both parties are pretty much communist/communist light.
Yes.
Like I said, lesser of evils earlier on. In one of your books, Lincoln, Marx, and the GOP, you state that Lincoln's administration, the GOP, and the Union Army were supported by socialists, Marxists, and outright communists. Yes. Were there any communists in the Lincoln administration?
Lincoln has the dubious honor of having the first outright communist, not only communist, but a personal friend of Karl Marx in his administration. Charles A. Dana, who was Assistant Secretary of, I believe it's Assistant Secretary of War in the Lincoln administration, was a communist and a close friend of Karl Marx. One of the guys who was a Union general, Wiedemeyer, Joseph Wiedemeyer, was a communist. He was a fellow communist with Marx and Engels in London. Came to the United States and had published the first, if not the first, one of the first copies of the Communist Manifesto. When Wiedemeyer came to the United States, he had a letter in his pocket that he presented to Dana, and whereas Marx was introducing Dana to Wiedemeyer, but this Wiedemeyer later became, I believe, a major general in the United States Army. There were several in the book, Marx, Lincoln, and the GOP. We actually have pictures and talk about the number of radical socialists, Marxists, and communists. And when you're thinking about there were several schools of communism. Marxism is now the dominant school, but there were other schools of communists. So that's why I say there were Marxists, radical socialists, and communists in the Union Army, in the Lincoln administration, and not only that, in the founding of the Republican Party. If it hadn't been for the radical German or radical socialists and communists, it is doubtful that Lincoln would have won Illinois and several other, Wisconsin and several other states up in the Northeast, and he probably would not have won the election. So the founding of the Republican Party, their first major victory, can be all you can thank the radical socialists and communists for that effort.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? The ones in Wisconsin and other places.
If I had my book in front of me, I could, but
Okay.
unfortunately, my memory, I'm 79 years old, but it's all documented in that book, Lincoln, Marx, and the GOP. So,
Okay.
by all means.
Now, and he wasn't just limited to people maybe in his cabinet or a general here or there. You had the 48ers that came from. These were a lot of the rank and file that joined as well. Talk about them a little bit.
Absolutely. Throughout the United States, and the 48ers, they get that name in 1848 throughout Europe. There were several radical socialists and communists, outright communists, but radical socialist revolutions going on. Most of them would be victorious for a while, and then what? Just like here in the United States, and what's happening looks like in the Democratic Party, the radicals take over, and the more moderates have to back out, and sooner or later, the more conservative elements kick the radicals out, and those radicals immigrated to the United States. And interesting enough, they took up positions in academia, in the press, in the media. Isn't that interesting? Where do we have most of our peer social rot today if it's not in academia, the media, and in political such as the Democratic and Republican parties? And that's where these 48ers came from, and they permeated Northern society. In this book I'm telling you about, I talk about where these radical socialists and Marxists were. There were only one small group in Texas, one small group in, I believe it was Kentucky. It was hundreds of them throughout the North. And the ones in Texas finally had to leave because the people in Texas chased them out. So the radical socialists, the 48ers, they immigrated to the North, and they took hold of the instruments of media, of propaganda. They understood that this is how you educate people away from the values, traditional values, into these more radical socialist ideas. That's how you get people to not understand the difference between a male and a female, because you keep indoctrinating them on this crap, and they actually will start believing it. And we've seen that too much here in these United States today. It lives on today.
Oh yeah.
It was not destroyed. As a matter of fact, there was a South Carolina Presbyterian minister who warned before he died in 1863 that if the North wins this war, you would see an increase in the secular humanists, the radical socialists, and the communist influence in American society. Thornwell, James
I've heard the
Henry
name.
Thornwell.
I've heard the name. Boy, was he right.
And he hit the nail on the head. At the close of the war between the states, Robert E. Lee, General Lee, was a friend, and they associated through the mail with Lord Acton of Great Britain. And Lord Acton was a very famous, well-known man of letters and politics. He was you've got to read some of his work. But anyway, Lord Acton was asking General Lee, said, now that the South has been defeated, what is going to become of America? Now, General Lee wrote him back and said that he feared for his country when all the rights which once belonged to the people of the sovereign states, when all that power and rights were collected in the hands of the politicians and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., he said, because at that time America would, quote, become aggressive abroad and despotic at home. Boy, did Lee get that right.
Almost psychic.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned this earlier. You talked about Lincoln having Francis Scott Key arrested. Can you put a little more info? Give us a little more info about that.
Yeah, that was Francis Scott Howard. That was Francis Scott Key's grandson.
Right.
Yeah. And very interesting. He was an editor of a newspaper in Maryland, and he had editorialized in opposition of waging war against sovereign states. He said the Constitution doesn't allow it, much like Buchanan had said from Pennsylvania. He said, like you've already indicated, Buchanan was opposed to secession, but he said, two wrongs don't make a right. You cannot justify waging war on a sovereign state just because you don't agree with their opinion of what the Constitution says. Likewise, Francis Scott Howard, who was the grandson of Francis Scott Key on his father's side. On his mother's side, his grandfather was a well-known, I wish I could remember his name now, a leader during the War for American Independence there in Maryland. So he comes from a family of patriotic people, and he said, this is not right. Well, what does Mr. Lincoln do? Well, Mr. Lincoln calls up his Secretary of War and say, hey, have the military arrest this man and throw him in jail, in a federal prison. So the military, now this is not civilian, this is the military, and he is a civilian individual. The military rides out to his house, arrests him, and takes him to a military jail. Now, here's the irony of it all. The military jail was at a place called Fort McHenry. Is that not? And he made the statement. Francis Scott Howard made the statement. Said the next morning I awoke and looked at that flag of that country that my grandfather was so proud to write about, and I had the feeling that that flag now must be representing not the freedom that my grandfather loved, but a tyranny. And he remained in prison for almost a year. Lincoln offered to let him out if he would sign a document saying that he was wrong, and he apologized. He said, never will I sign such a document. So he stayed in prison and incarcerated by the military, a civilian, and a grandson of Francis Scott Key. Next time you hear the Star Spangled Banner, you think about that. Yeah. Think about Mr. Lincoln, the man that you might want to worship as America's greatest president. Think about what he did to this man. And the same thing with Vallandigham, Clement Vallandigham, a representative from Ohio, who on the floor of the House of Representatives spoke against Lincoln's war against sovereign states. Now, Vallandigham opposed secession. He was not a secessionist, but he was opposed to waging war against sovereign states. He said the Constitution does not allow it. Mr. Lincoln didn't like that and had the military, a marshal, arrest the man, take him to a military court, have him tried, and he was banished from the United States. The only person that I can find that has ever been banished from the United States. So, and he was a former representative from the state of Ohio. And I remind you folks, Ohio is north of the Mason-Dixon. We're talking about not Southerners that Lincoln did this to, but Northerners, ministers of the gospel that was preaching against violence against people. Lincoln had them arrested. There was one gentleman, he was a Campbellite. Yeah, y'all know what a Campbellite is. That's a Church of Christ individual. Okay. yeah, from New York, from New York, who was telling his congregation that they had just as much right as the Quakers to say they were opposed to violence, so therefore they were not subject to the draft. Lincoln had that man arrested, and he wasn't the only minister. But again, I'm pointing that out because that's not a Southerner, that's somebody from New York.
Right.
So when you think that Lincoln was a great American that believed in civil rights and civil liberties, a protector of the Constitution, a savior of the Union, you know very little about Mr. Lincoln.
Absolutely. And there were a lot of people up north that, whether they were imprisoned or not, that was a common belief that, hey, wait a minute, we may not agree with secession, we may think it's bad overall for the country, but they have that right. And there was a lot of people in the north. Winfield Scott felt that way. He's like, and he was the general of the army, and he's like, okay, yeah, I don't think it's a good idea, but let him go. And if Lincoln hadn't called up for 75,000 troops after Sumter, number one, you wouldn't have had the men and the leadership from North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and then to a lesser degree Arkansas. That's a huge part of the Confederacy.
Yes.
And
yes.
if he had not created a situation that he did, then maybe the Deep South would have eventually come back in. Maybe not, but there was a possibility at least.
Yeah, we can speculate, and I enjoy the speculation, but it is pure speculation. But I always felt like if Lincoln had not pushed that effort, if they'd gone ahead, and you have to remember, Lincoln supported the Corrin Amendment to the Constitution. That was an amendment that defended and protected slavery. Not only did Lincoln, but a majority of the northern states said, yes, we'll sign this amendment to the Constitution. Slavery will be protected. So if the South was only interested in protecting slaves, why didn't they come back into the Union when it was obvious that the Corrin Amendment to the U.S. Constitution would protect slave property? Right. And of course, that wasn't the reason they seceded to begin with. They seceded because they felt like they were being financially and economically plundered as well as politically plundered. That's why they seceded. So the Corrin Amendment, more than anything else, I think proves that the war wasn't about slavery. It was about something else totally different. And usually, like most wars, it ends up economics. That's where you're going to have to look.
Yeah, follow the money. Follow the money.
Yeah.
America is celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. How does the Lincoln presidency compare to the meaning of that declaration? And we've kind of hit this somewhat already, but.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I always tell people there is no comparison. You'd have to contrast. You contrast things that are opposite. Things that are similar, you can say compare. You can compare an apple to an orange. They're fruits, they're sweet. But Lincoln is black and white. It's totally different because if you look at the very first words of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, it tells us that people have an unalienable right to alter or abolish a government. Now, if they have the unalienable right to abolish a government, that tells us that the government is not perpetual. And Lincoln said the Union would be perpetual. It would last forever. And again, I'll go back to the analogy of my wife and myself. Our Union is perpetual as long as the agreement that we made, the vows we made are maintained. But you break those vows and then that union is no longer enforceable. So it is perpetual as long as it maintains itself according to the document that founded the Union. So Lincoln really stand out as somebody who opposed the very of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence clearly states that the only legitimate government exists by the consent of the governed.
Absolutely.
And after Appomattox, after the defeat of the South, would somebody please tell me where was the consent of the people of the Confederate States of America when they were forced back into a union that they did not want to be a part of, in total violation to the Declaration of Independence? And it's going to be very interesting the next the rest of this year. This nation will be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of that document. I wonder how many people ever stop to think about Appomattox and the consent of the governed. How many of them will ever think about the right of a people to alter or abolish a government?
Yep.
Hey, that kind of sounds like what the Confederacy was doing, but yet Mr. Lincoln didn't see it like that. So, as I said, you cannot compare Mr. Lincoln's view of the Constitution. You have to contrast it because it is totally in opposition to what our founding fathers gave us. America is an exceptional nation if you follow the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution is based on that concept right there. The very first words of the Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution states, all power herein granted. That tells me that a superior force is granting authority to its agent. Who were these superior forces? Well, go to Article 7 of the Constitution. It was we the people of the sovereign states. And then to top it all off, we put the 9th and 10th Amendment in the Constitution.
To remove all doubt.
To let everybody know, hey, just because it's not written here doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that everything that we don't grant is reserved to we the people of the sovereign states. Those amendments and that Constitution, just like the Declaration of Independence, is basically a dead letter. The federal government does what it wants to do. We, the people, don't have the final voice on how we are to be governed, and that is so totally un-American.
Well, hopefully during this year, more people will read it and will connect the dots and say, hey, we're getting ready to celebrate something that we really have not experienced to a great degree, well, for most of our lives. I mean, really all of our lives.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty sad. Why are people like Mark Levin, V.D. Hansen, and others wrong in comparing the Confederacy to people like Walsh from Minnesota and the situation there and other states that are resisting ICE? They try to do this all the time. They try to say, oh, these are the new Confederates, and it's just like the old. It just drives me up the wall, but I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a good thing. When I first heard Mark Levin say that, I'm glad. Well, I beg your pardon. I never listened to Mark Levin. When he's on, I turn him off. I can't stand that picture of Lincoln. But it was V.D. Hansen. I call him V.D. Hansen, Victor David Hansen. Yeah. He's worse than V.D. He won't go away. Yeah. But anyway, when he was talking about the new Confederacy and this, number one, when the southern states seceded from the Union, they said so plainly. They said, we will not recognize your authority we withdraw it. Minnesota and Waltz have not done that. What they've done, they've stood up against a policy that has been adopted by the entirety of the nation. Now, if they don't like the policy, as far as I'm concerned, why don't they just leave? Why don't they say, okay, call a convention of the people of Minnesota and let's just withdraw from the Union and join Canada, if that's how they feel. But of course, he won't do that for number one, because I think right now most of the people will tell him to go pound sand because he's not a very popular governor in Minnesota now. But there is no comparison there again. If a state does not like what the federal government is doing, in my way of view, they have two choices. They can nullify the action, then appeal to their fellow states to support their nullification. And if you get a constitutional majority of states to support you, great. Then the federal government is put back on its heels. But if you can't do that, then you have the right to withdraw and alter if you can't alter, you can abolish that government and exist as a free sovereign state. But remember, if you leave the Union, you're leaving all the benefits of that Union. So that's why people say, oh, if you allow the states to secede, the Union will never stay together. My wife and I, we've lived together for 49 years. We've raised children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And don't tell me it's all been smooth and no ups and downs and bumps in the road. It has been. Anybody that lives with a woman knows that. And any woman that lives with a man understands that even more. You're going to have problems, but the benefits And the love that is there is what holds that relationship together, and you work through these problems. And that's what is so good about the original Republic of Republics that our founding fathers gave us. We were held together by the mutual benefit and goodwill. We respected each other. We didn't deride each other. We didn't ride on the backs of others and force others to pay our bills. We were a free people then. And if the government got out of hand, the federal government feared what we would do to it.
Yeah.
April the 15th is coming up here pretty soon, folks. Who do you fear more than the federal government right now when you got income taxes to pay and you're worried that you might get something wrong? So, the fear now is in the federal government. We fear the federal government. The federal government does not fear us. And that is all can be laid to the foot of Abraham Lincoln and the radical Republican Party.
Last question for you. Most conservatives complain about federal government overreach. While I don't think Lincoln is directly responsible for all the garbage we face today, I mean, we did have FDR, we had Wilson, we've had everybody since then. Could the federal government exert that overreach if not for Lincoln? So what I'm saying is, I don't totally blame him, but he certainly created the scenario that allowed these others to come in and make it worse.
Absolutely. But you always remember if it wasn't Lincoln in 1860, it could have been somebody else in 1864 or 1964 or 2064. What I think it was. I'm trying to think of the gentleman said that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.
Yeah.
We have to be eternally vigilant. Freedom is not just in the air. Our liberty is not just self-protected. We have to be promoters and defenders of our own liberty, our own freedom. And this generation, must do what it is required to see that future generations are bequeathed that same amount of liberty and freedom. So if it wasn't a Mr. Lincoln in 60 or in 64 and so on, it could have been somebody 100 years later. So yes, I agree with you 100%. Mr. Lincoln and the Republican Party laid the foundation for a deep state tyranny that we are dealing with now. President Trump is doing good work, I think, trying to rein in, but he'll never, I don't care how good he does that, 20 years after he's gone, guess what? The mechanism for federal tyranny still exists, thanks to Mr. Lincoln. So, I hope our commander-in-chief, I wish him well. I hope he can rein in the overreach of the federal government, but that's only temporary relief, folks, until we return to a policy where we, the people of the sovereign states, are the one who will be the final judge of how we are governed. The federal government will always be a potential tyrant.
So we had to find a way to reform I call them the stinking Lincoln worshipers.
Yeah, you go.
And they are both Republican and Democrat, because, of course, today the Democrat Party is nothing but full-fledged communist. Unfortunately, the GOP is not a lot better. Anyway, any closing thoughts?
The main thing is that I think that our people, Southerners, need to realize we have more power than we have thought about. Y'all realize that the current president of the United States would not be the president of the United States if it were not for the electoral votes from the Confederate States of America. Now, you think about that. Around 52% of his electoral votes came from Confederate states. Go do the math. I've done it.
I like that.
So he would not be president if it was not. We have more power than we think. And as far as locally, we must learn how to make sure local politicians and our elected people understand that we do have that power. And if you vote against our interests, we will vote against you. We have a long memory. we will remember if you're running for senator in Louisiana and you used to be a representative in Louisiana, and as a representative, you voted along with Pocahontas and the other liberals to get rid of the names of the Confederate names on military bases and to remove the Arlington Reconciliation Monument. If you voted along with those liberals, we Southerners, we gonna remember that. And come election time, we gonna vote accordingly. And that is our right to tell people how we feel. So, and I hope you noticed I said Louisiana running for senator, a representative in Louisiana who may be running for that office who did exactly as I said, and she will not get my vote.
And she shouldn't.
Amen.
So you've got some other books, and you've got several books out. Are you working on any currently?
Ron and I are always working on something. So yes, I am. But the book that I'm really interested on, hopefully this time next year have it out again, is Myths of American Slavery. That book is out of publication. It's somewhat dated, so I want to go back and redo it. So a lot of it is just redoing some and adding to information that wasn't there when I originally published that book. I believe I published that, Pelican Publishing, about 1990. I think it was 96 or 98, something like that. So we want to redo that one, and several other books that we want to work on. So Ron and I are busy all the time. I've got 5 more months as Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I'll have gracious time again to work on these projects. So I want to continue that. And I'm 70, I'll be 70, well, I am 78 now. I believe I've got a few more good years in me, and I want to keep pushing the cause of liberty for all Americans and pride for Southerners.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you had a part in it, and I'm sure you did, the book that came out last year or year before last about Reconstruction. That is an excellent book. And that's an era, that's a topic that most people don't know. If they're taught anything, all they're taught is, well, the Klan was born during Reconstruction and all they did was terrorize the blacks that wanted to vote. So the Reconstruction book's an excellent book.
Thank you. That's Ron's book, but you have to remember everything he does goes through my filter. Everything I do goes through his filter. Ron and I are a team. We've been a team since conception, so we'll probably continue till, as somebody said, when y'all die, they're gonna put one on ice till the other one dies and put you in the same coffin. I don't know. By that time, I'm in heaven. I don't care what y'all do.
Any upcoming events you want to tell the audience about?
Oh, absolutely. We're coming up in the last weekend of this month. There's a Stephen D. Lee Institute in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. We're looking at it from a Southern perspective. And I've got some excellent speakers there. We got 5 speakers, and I'm just going to mention one name that some of our people may remember is Dr. Thomas D. Lorenzo.
Oh, yeah.
Who is, he is the guy that really wrote the book on Abraham Lincoln. So we've got, and there's a lovely young lady, Wajiri Joya. Yeah, she's from Kenya, and she is absolutely marvelous. She's going to talk about Marxism and Cultural Revolution in the South. So, and that's just 2. We got other speakers too, but they are great. Jeffrey Adicott is going to be there. He's a great spokesman.
He is.
Great intellectual from Texas. I hate for him to leave Texas, because if he leaves Texas, they won't have any more intellectuals. So now I get all my Texas friends mad at me. See, I'm from Louisiana. I can say that.
Well, now my producer will be at that event.
Yes.
So, and I didn't know you were going to have all those people. I'd like to go. I don't think I can make that happen, but I'd definitely like to see if I
Well,
can.
we'd love to have you. We'd love to have a lot of people there. This is going to be, and we're doing our best to serialize it and tape it so that we'll have it in the future. It's just like this program here. We're going to boost this program because I want people to hear about the Declaration of Independence, about Abraham Lincoln from a Southern perspective. And we appreciate all that y'all are doing on your channel. It is just marvelous. And Ron has had a lot of good fun working with y'all, and I've enjoyed being with you tonight.
Well, hey, it's great to have you on. Appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you, everything you do. And I'd love to have you back on again.
We'll do it.
All right. Well, you have a good day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
God bless you. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program today. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. We're slowly closing in on the 1,000 subscribers. Please help us hit that goal by the end of February. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Got a few announcements for you. Our General Assembly is back in session, and there's a lot of important legislation being presented, good or bad. I can't really cover all the legislation as it works its way through the various committees. Obviously, I will have some legislators on to discuss specific legislation, but it's important to educate yourself and get involved, and when needed, make calls to the various committees on a wide array of different legislation. So I will tell you where to go to keep up with pending legislation. Anything having to do with nullification and other sovereignty-related bills can be found by subscribing to the Substack at tncss.weebly.com. That's tncss.weebly.com. Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty is what that stands for. For pro-gun legislation, go to tennesseefirearms.com. Richard Archie and John Harris know everything about the gun laws in Tennessee and about federal court opinions inside out. This is the best site. And you don't have to be a member. You can sign up, or you can go to the website every Friday, and they'll have an update of what's going to be coming to the upcoming week as far as committees having gun bills in them. So that's a great site for you. For homeschool issues, go to freeyourchildren.com. That's Tiffany Boyd's group. Other general issues, TennesseeStands.com and Tennessee Eagle Forum. I will be doing a special edition of the Informer Report tonight, beginning at 9 p.m., with more details on upcoming legislation, including some commentary on current events. That's tonight, 9 p.m. So please be sure to join us again tonight, 9, for an information-packed program. Tomorrow is Maha Day on the Hill, February 17th at 9 a.m. in the Cordell Hall Building, 425 John Lewis Way in Nashville. I've got some other announcements here that I want to pass on to you. There is a Reagan Day dinner in Chester County. That's going to be on the, 21st, 5:30 p.m. I don't see a location on this, but just get in touch with the Chester County GOP. You're going to have all 3 gubernatorial candidates. Monty Fritz, did I say Monty Fritz? Yeah, you're going to have Monty Fritz, John Rose, Monty Fritz. Oh, and Marcia might be there. She'll probably send somebody to sub for her. But anyway, that's who's supposed to be there, is Monty Fritz, John Rose, and Marcia Blackburn. And that is on the 21st, 5:30 p.m., Chester County GOP. And we also have, the next thing is Danny Blitz will be, and I apologize, I've got these a little bit out of order. Yeah. She'll be in Sparta, Tennessee. This is the White County, Republican Women in White County. This is February 23rd, 4:30 p.m. And this is the White County Courthouse, 1E Brockman Way, room 222 in Sparta, Tennessee. And she's going to talk about the duty to interpose, understanding sovereignty, compact fact versus nationalist theory. And then Monty Fritz will be in Jackson County, February 24th, 6 p.m. And that's in Gainesboro, Tennessee. And the 27th is the Jackson County GOP, Crossville, 8:30. So once again, you get some opportunities to see Monty Fritz. If you haven't heard him speak, you need to hear him speak. On March 21st, from 1 to 6 p.m. Central Time. And you're going to have to reserve for this. This is Jeffrey Cobble, constitutional attorney. We've had him on the show before. This guy is great. He is certainly one of us. He's going to talk about the 16th and 17th Amendment, jury nullification, and other issues like that, 14th Amendment as well. So you have to reserve ahead of time. You have to call 931-316-9639. And this is also in Sparta. So 931-316-9639. That's to hear Jeffrey Cobble, constitutional attorney. If you've never listened to Jeff, he's great. You really want to check him out. Okay, and we got some promos to hit you here with this Wednesday, 7 p.m. Central. We're going to have a memorial edition remembering H.K. Egerton. He was known. This will be this Wednesday. Don't miss it. H.K. Egerton was known as the Black Confederate. He's a veteran and a rebel who stood up for what he believed, and he really, he was a controversial guy. He was a Black Confederate, and that offends a lot of people. But he knew the true history of the South and the Confederacy, and he knew his history, and he went around the country. And we were fortunate to have him before he passed away. Now, the 18th would have been his 78th birthday, I believe, and so we decided to do it on that day. And we're going to have some people on the show. Locally, hopefully we'll have Rick Revel with us here in studio, but also we're going to have some people that have been with him for years, and they can tell us a whole lot more about what he's done for informing people about the truth. So looking forward to that. That's this coming Wednesday. And Monday we'll be back on our regular time, 7 p.m. Central. So February 23rd, Tennessee District 79 candidate for State House is John Llewellyn, and he'll be our guest, and he'll tell us why he's running. And he's our first guest from 7 to 8, and then from 8:30 to 9:30, we are going to have, and it's also on 23rd, the founder and the current president of TEHA, that's the Tennessee Homeschool Education Association. I think he started this organization maybe 40 years ago, and his name is Claiborne Thornton, and he's our guest for the 23rd at 8:30 p.m. So got a lot of good shows lined up, and hope you'll join us. And please spread the word. We do need, we got a lot of people that watch the show but haven't subscribed. It doesn't cost you anything. We're not going to charge you if you subscribe, but we would like for you to subscribe. If we hit a certain level, it makes things a little easier for us to stay on the air. So once again, next week we'll be back on the regular schedule. Okay, I've got to scroll down here. I apologize. All right, take time to check out our other programming brought to you by My Parish TV and West Tennessee TV by going to myparishtv.com. You can find links to the Mike Weatherford Show as well as Sportscast with Jeremy Bucklow. Tomorrow night, Mike welcomes singer-songwriter Rick Revel for the premiere and debut of his newest. Okay, I was just informed that I gave you the wrong information. I'm reading the teleprompter instead of the screen. Anyway, tomorrow night, 7 p.m., at world premiere, brand new music video, Haji, Vince Dodd. Okay, this is behind the scene footage, so you don't want to miss that. That's the local guy here who's doing pretty well, so tune in for that one. And then next week, next Sunday, spring sports preview, and this is going to cover the Patriot boys soccer, track and field. Patriots are the Henry County Patriots, so this is a local interest more so. And you're going to have Coach Julian Beard, Coach Dylan Poole. Let's see, several others. Okay, so that is Sunday, February 22nd at 7:30 p.m. And we don't have a slide for this, but next Sunday, we're going to have Gene Andrews. Now, Gene Andrews has been on the show before. Usually we have him on to talk about Forest because he actually works out at the Nathan Bedford Forest home, and he knows a lot about NFB, but he is also a Vietnam veteran. So next Sunday, we're going to have him on, I think it's 2 o'clock. I'll get back with you on that. And so tune us in for next week. And come and see her because he's going to tell you about his experience in Vietnam. Well, hey, once again, thank you for joining us and spread the word. That's it from Paris, Tennessee, that is.